We're building less than 1% of that figure, which are new build every year. So we shouldn't just be talking about being green and sustainable with new build housing, but also how we retrofit and become green and sustainable with the 25 million existing homes we've got. You may or may not know this, but we were supposed to have zero carbon homes built in this country from 2016. Legislation was brought in 2007. So the industry had nearly 10 years, 9 years to prepare for zero carbon housing. And then this amazing politician, George Osborne, stepped in and decided he would scrap that scheme because he was getting a lot of kickback from the big house builders. And that was completely scrapped, even though everyone was preparing for it. So from 2016 until now, every single home that was built in the UK should have been zero carbon. And for me, all of this ties back to what Rachel has mentioned, and Kevin's mentioned many times in the past, about healthy homes. Now, a healthy home isn't just somewhere that has wonderful natural lights, has lovely views of trees, and might have decent air quality. It's also about your mental health, and that's about space standards. But it's also about affordability, because if you're struggling to pay your rent or you're struggling to pay your mortgage, the amount of mental stress that causes is unbelievable. And there's allegedly, and I'm not sure if this figure is exactly correct, but I've heard that there's 3.2 million people in the UK living in fuel poverty. So we've got this amazing link between sustainability, green design, not just protecting the environment, but also providing levels of comfort for ourselves in a very green, clean, and truly affordable way. And if we do that, we should be reducing our energy bills at the same time. And if design can step in to create homes that are genuinely more affordable, and I'm talking about new forms of tenure, new ways of living, and that would then transform the planning system. So you can get me going on this, by the way, for about a month, so I'm going to have to be very quick. But when you think about things like the use class system, we have this use class system in the UK saying you can only use a building for this use, and it can only do this, this, or this. And actually what Rachel's just said is actually a home needs to do many different things, lots and lots of different things. You might be able to work from there. You might want to play from there. Yes, it might be your family network that lives there, but you might do many different things under a single roof. And then if the planning system was geared up to be truly sustainable on a much bigger scale, then I think we'd be transforming the way that we live, because it isn't just about homes as isolated pieces of design. It's about the communities that they sit in. So for me, every single thing that I've just mentioned, from the affordability crisis through to the fuel poverty crisis, through to sustainability, through to the use class system, through to the planning system, they are all inextricably linked and need to change.
Thanks so much, George, for that introduction. That's great. I should just remind everybody, if you want to ask questions, put them in the chat. And I think what we'll do is we'll have both speakers and then we'll do the chat afterwards, if that's okay. So if Craig, if you're ready, I'd like to move over to you to introduce your thinking. Craig,
okay.
as Kevin said, designer, developer, and entrepreneur, looking at how to develop low carbon and sustainable outcomes in incredibly original, I would say, and even disruptive ways. And I'm really delighted to hear Craig's ideas about how a post-COVID world will need new and different housing models to meet the triple whammy he describes: challenges of climate emergency, housing crisis, and rapidly rising unemployment. Really speaks to the themes that George has been talking about. So over to you, Craig. Thank you.
Thank you. I just need to be allowed to share screen, if the host could do that, if you know how to do that. And then I will, unlike George, I will rely on pictures and words. I'm not as talented as George, so still.
Gemma, are you able to do that?
It does say that you should, one participant can share at a time, so I'll
okay,
just,
it says host has disabled screen sharing.
Okay, just, can you try again now?
Yeah, so that's come in. Great, thank you very much.
Great.
And I'll just, if people can just say that they can see the screen, that would be great.
Yes.
Does that
Yeah.
work?
All good. Yep. Very good.
Okay, so
Very
that's me, and
great.
I think George has covered a lot of what we already. The world has changed. It has touched us all, whether that's been in Rachel's case through actual illness, and far too many people have lost their life. And for all of us, lockdown has touched the entire population of certainly most of Europe, and if not most of the world. And it will continue to change. And while the change has been appalling in many ways, the opportunity now to completely rethink what we're doing is very exciting, even if it's done through adversity. And unfortunately and sadly, furlough is masking a wave of unemployment that will simply make the housing crisis worse. Affordability will become even more of a challenge. And we still got climate emergency to deal with. So it is all change. And we're only building about half of what we need. And I won't read these out, but these are quotes from top 6 house builders in the UK who are basically disinterested in delivering affordable homes because it just cuts margins. And so we used to describe owning a home as being on the property ladder. Well, the property ladder has no rungs, and affordable housing is now the oxymoron of our time. People say it, but 20% of a discounted market price is still way out of the reach of most people. So we need to completely rethink. So I think we need to stop asking the current development model to deliver affordable homes. Why should it? It cares not for that because it reduces the exit price of a developer. So we should stop asking that machine to deliver affordable homes, and we need to build new ones. We need to have new models through which we can develop. And I've worked with a lot of developers, and I can guarantee none of them are rocket scientists. It's really simple. They do 3 things. They buy land, which is scarce and expensive, and every farmer wants to make his million out of his acre or hectare. Building cost is largely hardware, and it's largely a fixed cost. While you can get more expensive homes and much cheaper homes, a brick fundamentally costs what a brick costs, timber costs what timber costs. So they're largely fixed costs. So land is variable, hardware is fixed. And then the aspiration of all developers is to be developing in the right postcode. So they avoid areas that are deprived and are struck by poverty, and simply escalate a machinery of profit which targets the highest value every time. So we've got to change this in some shape or form. And this is my little sketch of developers. They all wear top hats and have canes and wear spats. And they're interested in building cheap because the cheaper they can build, the better their exit is when they come to sale. So they're not motivated by a number of means to deliver affordable homes. So can we build a new machine and not pay for land? Because if hardware is roughly fixed, and if postcode by sale is a variable, then land is where we need to do all the change, I think. And the answer to that question is yes, we need not pay for land. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the We Can Make Homes project that we developed here in Bristol, which is a community-led housing project working with an embedded organization called the Northwest Media Centre. And this is the last time we built houses at any real scale was after 1919, driven by the Housing Act, known as the Homes Fit for Heroes, by Dr. Addison. He was actually the Minister for Health, not the Minister for Housing, which is plays to a lot of what's already been said. So Knoll West is 5,000 semi-detached red brick council homes, 3 beds. You'll find 4 million of these all across the UK. And hold on. So, yeah, slide, click forward. So we worked with the community for a year on a community-led housing project. We went to a developer's fair to tread, and we did a lot of mapping exercises with the community. We found that 54% of all those homes are lived in by 1 or 2 people over the age of 55. The other 44% are lived in by mum, dad, son, daughter with a baby on the way, boyfriend wants to move in, baby arrives, you have 2 adults and 1 child in a bedroom designed for a child in the 1930s. They are empty nesters and new shoots. They all wanted 1 or 2 bedroom homes, and there was none in the whole of the estate. Out of 5,000 homes, they are predominantly 3 beds. So we mapped the whole estate for space, looking to build 1 and 2 bedroom space compliant homes, and we found 3,500 microsites in gaps, corners, gardens, and no man's land. So we found some land hidden in plain sight. So this is densification, but opt-in densification. So we built one. It's on a microsite in Norwest. We built it without planning permission. I'll come to that in a minute. To the highest standards, it's close to Passive House, triple glazed, all LED, and we did it in 10 weeks. It's a 1 bedroom, 37 square meter home, and you can do these in 1 or 2 or 3. There's no compromise on quality. I put this up against any house builder in the country. And then we invited the mayor to sleep in this guerrilla housing project that we had initiated. So we have an executive mayor, so he writes checks. That's Marvin Rees. And we asked him to sleep over, and then we told him we didn't have planning permission. He said, how did you do this? How did that work? Then our partners in the project, it took a little while for the kind of planning officers to kind of come around to guerrilla housing, but then our partners in the project. So why no planning permission? Well, it's a caravan. The Caravan Act allows us to deploy up to 4 bedroom homes. There are size constraints, there are mobility, it has to be able to move, and it has to be constructed in a certain way, but it does not need to be built cheaply, and it would comply the way we build with the building regulations, but it works as a caravan. So but it's not a caravan, it's a house on a chassis, not foundations. It's definitely not a shipping container with compromised space standards, and it does all of these things. And 16% of the population in Norwest are currently living in fuel poverty. So we would eradicate fuel poverty by doing this. It's community-led. We're working with people. The idea that people could develop their own property has been largely lost in the UK, apart from grand designs type projects. But in Yorkshire, in the 19th century, building societies, cooperative structures, credit unions were all set up in order for people to be able to take control of their own financial methods by which they could acquire or develop property. And these are real people in Norwest, and those are some of the quotes. We're now funded by Homes England, Power to Change, and the Nationwide Foundation. So we believe that people-powered housing is the way forward. We don't think everybody should be doing guerrilla housing, but sometimes you have to ask for forgiveness, not permission. And we make it all out of renewable materials. It's entirely made out of timber and straw. And so we're going to fix climate change as well as the housing crisis. So this is how we make a TAM. So that's the straw installation. And if CO2 could be pumped into little kind of balls like the one I'm sitting on, that's why I'm bouncing around. That's the amount of CO2 not in the atmosphere, but consumed by the straw. That's something called compressed straw board. Then we have timber structure. Then we have the cladding. And this building has captured and is storing 27 tons of atmospheric CO2. And then the beauty of designing buildings that do not glue themselves down to the ground is that you can then imagine where you could put them. That land isn't what we always thought it was. There's a lot hidden in plain sight, and then there's areas of our city and townscapes and urban townscapes that we can develop. So this is working with a homelessness charity called Emmaus. Bottom right is the picture of the existing building, and we're going to put 21 units of different sizes up on their roof. This is a really tight site in All Hallows in Bristol, where we're getting 5 units slotted into an urban gap site, but still creating appropriately sized accommodation and space standards and landscape. Working with Leeds Community Homes, and I was fortunate enough to work on the Lilac co-housing project in Leeds, and Leeds Community Homes came out of that project. Here's a typical 1970s tower block with a large landscape area, largely unused, and some derelict car parking and garaging. So we are parking homes there. This is the Galleries Shopping Centre in Bristol. on top of which we're putting double stacked TAMs. And then this is us working with the NHS here in Bristol with the local trust. The number of health and key workers that we need to be able to accommodate rapidly in the UK to meet demand is going through the roof. And so all of this is designed to meet that need. We've now moved out of this office in COVID. We've become office free, but this, we secure planning permission to put 13 units. We don't own the building. We've got planning permission to put 13 units on the roof. So garages, 1970s concrete buildings, etc. And then I think we're gonna, this is my last slide. And so I think we should ask forgiveness, not permission anymore. I think I'm tired, I'm too old to keep on worrying about permission. I think guerrilla housing could be a thing, and I'm happy to butt heads with planners all around the country on that. I think we should think small and scale fast. And to paraphrase Ernst Schumacher, small is beautiful. Housing as if people mattered is what we need to do. And that's where I'm going to stop. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Craig. I'll just move into essentially the debate mode now. I'm going to read from the chats and I'll field questions back and forth. So firstly, a question actually.
Can I ask the first question to Craig? Do you mind?
Go for it.
Are you now like a member of a caravan park? Are you a registered caravan park man or something? Like, do you have to have registration to run your caravan parks?
No, you. Under the law, the planning legislation is blind to caravans. It cannot deal with that. But caravan parks are subject to what are called licenses. So you apply for a license to create a caravan park. But we're not trying to do that. We're creating housing using opt-in densification where people need them. So we're not creating parks as such.
Craig, I think me and you need to go to business together and just start some amazing caravan parks. Really beautiful ones. Really beautiful ones. And do you know what? Genuinely, I sat in a meeting about 7 or 8 years ago. And this is why just hearing your talk has blown me away a little bit. So about 7 or 8 years ago, I tabled a whole set of drawings because we analysed the Caravan Act. Really, and we were actually going to set up a caravan park, genuinely. And everyone thought I was mad because what they kept saying to me was, but it exists already. So why would you want to do it again? And I said, no, it's about reinventing the caravan park in a completely different way. Because it's amazing some of the loopholes out there because you've got to play that game, I think, to get things through. So I'm devastated to hear that you're not a registered caravan park.
But I think I might become one now.
I think we need to talk, Craig. Let's have a chat after this debate.
One of the loopholes that I think would be really interesting to exploit, my understanding, so my dad's a lawyer and he wrote a book called, really exciting book called Boundaries and Easements. And I have to admit that I haven't read it, but he has told me some of the interesting bits. And one of the interesting bits is that apparently on common land, if you can build a house and get smoke coming out of the chimney in 24 hours, you're allowed to leave it there. I think George is going to say something to that.
That began in Wales over 200 and something years ago. It had to be on common land. But if you could build a house during the hours of darkness, as long as that smoke was coming out the hearth and the chimney by the time the sun came up, you were allowed to keep the house. And not only that, if you stood at the four corners of the house and threw a hammer as far as you possibly could, that defined your boundary to your house. So yeah, if someone wants to go and do that this weekend, I highly recommend it.
Even better, we could resolve homelessness in a few radical common land takeovers.
Yeah. Unfortunately, legislation has changed, so your father's kind of not quite right anymore, and me making that suggestion is ridiculous. But I'd love it if it happened.
On the record of saying that, okay.
Yeah. But you're touching on a very important point, and that is about legislation and everybody feeling that they're not allowed to do things. I still think on a very, very simple level, if people have a small scale structure at the end of their garden, why can't they create that as a dwelling for their kids to live in? And it's really, really, really difficult to do that because everyone's paranoid that everyone's going to build houses at the end of their garden and sell them off for a massive profit, which has happened lots during the 90s and the noughties. And that's why I keep coming back to the planning system in some ways. It's great that Craig's discussing ways of getting, if you like, under the radar and not having to go through the planning system. But in some ways, we shouldn't have to fight that battle. Yeah. The planning system is very antiquated. It's very out of date for how we live now. And that's one of the biggest problems today. So when we talk about extended families or truly affordable living for our kids, how many people have kids that might leave home, go off and do further or higher education and then want to come back because it's really unaffordable for them to buy somewhere else? So I was in New Zealand last year, and I remember someone saying to me, I said, look, you've got this fantastic structure down the end of your garden. Wouldn't it be brilliant if the planners would let you turn that into a house? And they went, well, you can. And I went, you can't do that in the UK. And they went, what? And I won't do the swear word that they did, but they couldn't actually quite believe it, that on a piece of land that you owned, you couldn't actually build a separate structure for your kids to live in a very safe and very good and controlled, affordable environment. I mean, isn't that nuts? That's just one example of a nut system that you're not allowed to do that. Bonkers.
I think, do you want to answer, Craig, just in relation to ways of managing the land? I know that with the project that you had a way of making sure that people couldn't go on to sell the
yeah, we are now working with the planners in Bristol, and I teach at a School of Planning and Architecture, so my planning colleagues are deeply respected, but this machine that they work in isn't designed to deliver housing fast either. And some commercial developers will take advantage of that through permitted development, and I can see some questions about PD in the chat box. But yeah, so what we do is that that's half of the land there now is privately owned, half is still managed by the council. So what we're doing, so working with the council, we are demonstrating using a social value calculator that they can assign the land for free. So we're turning the capital cost of land into a zero cost revenue model. So we could pay them ground rent, but we've established that we don't need to do that. And so what we do is that we assign the land into a community land trust. So it's a new form of land trust, which is a dispersed community land trust. So instead of it being a red line around 3 acres, it's lots of little red lines around 100 square meters at a time. And then we sweep all of those into a land trust. So you can't speculate on the land. And then 10 years go from social rent, shared ownership, and some market open market sales, market rent and market sales. So the key thing here is not for us all to become housing pirates and go out and, although I think that would be fun, it has to respect community. It has to eventually fall into a normalized way of thinking about building our own homes. And we become groomed by our housing model to accept housing delivered to us in the way it is. We don't need to do that. George has said New Zealand, go to Canada, go to America, go to Australia. They still have very different approaches to land. We have some unique things in the UK. The caravan also is a chattel of an existing building. We have familial rights to put a caravan in and have somebody live in them if they're within the curtilage. We have squatter rights. We have land held in common. We have all sorts of really interesting land ownership. And Shrubsole, I forget his first name, has done a huge amount of work on who owns what. And I think we just need to become more literate in land, its value, and who owns and manages it. I'll stop.
Thank you. I can tell it's going to be hard for us to even get to the questions in the chat. I feel that we should start with Greg's because he posted so early on, and he asked, culturally, we've become accustomed to materialism and overconsumption, but life during lockdown has arguably caused many people to reflect on their current lifestyle and values. Do you think the concept of Japanese micro-living has the potential to disrupt the UK housing market as people begin to explore new and unconventional aspects of home design?
Well, I mean, I'm bound to say yes, because I make amazing spaces and it's all about small scale design. So yes, But it's interesting that he's actually put on Japanese micro living, and I think that's quite an important distinction. If you look at some terribly designed micro living, and I'm going to touch a little bit on permitted development, which is another question further down, actually. It's interesting with, if you merge what Craig's saying with the permitted development point, and then the question that's coming from Greg, that could be an entire debate in itself for the next 5 hours, because permitted development rights is about the conversion of commercial buildings into residential without the need for planning permission. There are zero space standards. Now, when that's manipulated and abused as a system, the quality of the stuff that's being built is abhorrent. I mean, I've seen some horrendous things that have been built under permitted development rights. And one of the problems with our, not just our country, but many countries, is because there's so much money to be made in housing. If you build something crap, it will still sell. That is the tragedy. There's so much demand and very little supply, which has already been touched on already. Even the crappiest of places will be sold. And if they can't be sold because the housing waiting list is so long, I can fairly well guarantee that you can be put on a kind of housing benefit system, if you like, and start manipulating governments covering the rents for people who can't afford to live in decent places. So micro design is obviously a great thing to do if it's beautifully designed. And actually, on Amazing Spaces, and I'm sorry to plug my show, the joy of Amazing Spaces. But do you know what? Irrespective of being television, it's been a learning curve for me. It's been fantastic over the last 8-9 years to make that series, because I've seen people who quite often, through a desperate need to have something for themselves that they own, a lot of people who cannot afford to get on the property ladder at all, or choose to live a different life to being in a place where they need a 25-year mortgage. It's got lots of permanence to it. They've got to pay stamp duty. They've got to pay legal fees. They've got to pay move-in costs. You know, someone who wants a slightly more flexible way of living are creating some of the most wonderful small spaces you could ever imagine. And why are they wonderful? Because they're spending an awful lot of time designing them and really thinking about it. And also it's a self-build project. And whenever anyone does anything self-build for themselves, I guarantee you the quality is infinitely better than what the market provides. It just is. And I've seen that across the world, never mind just in the UK. I mean, what gives me a lot of hope is that even though the mass house builders, of which there are kind of 8 or 9 super house builders, if you like, they provide the majority of the 200,000 plus houses a year. If you put together all the self-builders in the UK together, every single one of them together, there's over 15,000. That's virtually the biggest. So there is hope. I mean, it's not big enough, and land still isn't available at the level it should be for self-builders. I'm going to bang on about New Zealand again. I might as well just move there because I bang on about it so much. The number of times I've turned up at what I thought was a development in New Zealand, you know, and all the hoardings are there and the flags are flying and everything else. And I'd pull in on my motorbike and I'd go into their kind of showroom and say, well, can I see the houses that you sell? And they go, we don't sell houses. We just sell plots of land. You build the house yourself. And they have a series of design standards, and the plots are fairly well defined. And you have to follow that plot size, but generally within reason, with a few constraints, you can build what you like. Now that's amazing. And when we talk about loss of jobs and job shortages, you know, all the guys that I know and girls who are building their houses out there get their mates involved, and their mates an electrician, and their uncle's a plumber, and this kind of cross-fertilization of skills as well. You know, the knowledge economy is being handed over. It's a really exciting thing to be part of. And I think micro design is part of the answer. It's not the only answer. I think it is part of the answer, but only if they are projects that are staggeringly well designed. And you've talked already, Craig, about your townhouse. You know, you can tell just by looking at the images of what's being built, it's way beyond the standards of most house builders. But that's because there's been a passion about design. And unfortunately, in this country, we don't legislate for good design. We should legislate for it more. And this is the difficult thing, you know, that you can change government policy, you can change legislation a little bit as well, but actually design is something that's really hard to legislate for.
I think tiny house or compact living or micro should be a choice. We're in the permitted development sector. We're seeing abuse of space standards and quality and just appalling stuff. So we're quite strict about that. So we will only do what we would call substandard space, i.e., not meeting the standard but small, when the person who's going to live there has made it their choice to do it, not us just pushing tiny at them. And that's with Emmaus. The rooftop scheme is made up of 1, 2, and then small compact units. And these are, they're there as a variety of choice for people who were once homeless. As they move back into more conventional living, some do not want to take on the responsibility of a 40 square meter unit. They actually, for their mental health, they actually want it small because it's their world and they're completely in control of it. So I think all of these things are interesting to pursue, where the person who's lived there has made the choice. As soon as you start putting people into smaller spaces, and the design quality thing is an important one, but I think the commercial world will rush to drop space standards like a stone if they can get away with it. So it has to just be controlled. That would be my view on that.
Thank you. Continuing down the questions, I think maybe we've really just responded to Kevin's question. Gemma's asked about high density, and I suppose it's quite easy to think of these smaller interventions potentially sprawling at sort of high density but low rise. So it'd be quite interesting to reflect on how we should respond to needs for high density, and also how we can kind of think about shared community spaces being part of that. And particularly if you're talking about infill, are you taking away some of those shared spaces potentially? So
maybe even that question alone, you could have another 5-hour debate on about density, where you do high and low density. That's massive. There are places where I think high density is completely relevant. But again, I think, whether you're designing something which is 20 or 30 square meters, or you're doing a tiny house and micro living at low density, or whether you're doing the same unit, and I hate calling the units, by the way, they're homes, but in a high density block, it's about how they're positioned, how they're designed, and what public amenities you've got, what social spaces you've got, what green spaces you've got. And for me, that applies to a thing at the end of your garden, and it applies to an apartment or a maisonette within a giant tower block. You still need those things. It's, in some ways, it can become quite a depressing world when you go into some high density, high rise developments, and it's just many, many houses stacked on top of each other, with a lift core and a lift shaft and your waste disposal and some underground parking. And there's no breakout spaces, there's no real green spaces, there's no places to really meet other than by the lift door. They're going to be quite soul destroying spaces. So I'm never ever going to say I'm against high density, because I think, even in places like London, it's a relatively low density city, to be honest with you, compared to your Hong Kongs and your Singapores and your New Yorks. It's still a low density green space. So I'd never say yes or no to either. It still comes back to all of the simplest things that we stand by when it comes to housing developments of any density. Sustainability, public realm, people come together, public amenities, social spaces, green spaces. And as you said in your introduction, maybe being able to see a tree once in a while is just a beautiful thing. I think it's all of those that contribute to your health and well-being and your happiness. And I think happiness is something that isn't talked about enough in architecture. Alan de Botton wrote his book about, architecture and happiness, which I thought was a bit of a revelation. It was tragic that architects hadn't really written about it in any significant way beforehand. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about us being kind of very happy, hopefully quite sociable people within a community, and being happy in our world and our home that we build. So I'm not going to really get into the density debate, because it depends where.
So I would add, just briefly, I think COVID has shone a light on density done badly. Where families overcrowded have no means of getting out shared corridor spaces. I hate corridor spaces. I think the number of even well-designed apartments where you walk down a soulless corridor to somebody's apartment is just the antithesis of how you'd want to live. But and Richard Rogers wrote a report saying, well, tall is good, but low to medium density is lower height, medium density might actually create better spaces to live in. And I think as well, the commercial market will always optimize profit and minimize the gift of space to people. Those sort of things that, as an architect, if you go over to France and see some of the good housing that was done there, they've got some bad ones as well. But if you look at Corbusier, with running tracks on the roof, I've never seen one of those in the UK. So we can design it. So in the same way we design micro and it can be beautiful and you could imagine living in it, density has to be beautiful and deliver all of the outcomes. And if one thing COVID is going to do is demand that we design better in denser urban environments.
Can I just come back in on that? And I know you probably want to jump to the next question, but can I just come in?
Can you try? No, thanks. Good girl.
Juliet, it's really lovely, Juliet, that you're feeding your kid at the minute, but you might want to put your microphone on silent. Thanks, Juliet. It's everything that we're talking about is about a passion for good, well-designed, hopefully beautiful homes that improve our health, our happiness, and our well-being, that allow us to grow as families and allow us to be together as families and have your own private spaces, but also come together as a family when you need to and have contact with people in your community as and when you need to. We might not all be super sociable all the time, but all the stuff we're talking about is, I kind of think it's quite simple stuff. I don't think it's difficult, but we seem to be fighting against the system that doesn't really understand or fully value that, or even, if I'm honest, maybe even know how to create it. And I don't know, maybe this is probably something I should be saying at the end, but for me, I think we need a cultural shift in this country about genuinely putting a value, not a price, a value on what homes means to us as a society, really. And I'm not talking about that in some kind of very lefty liberal way. I think it's for the betterment of all of us to have a good, decent, affordable, secure, stable home to live in. I really do. And I think the benefits to society broadly could be amazing. I work with governments. Well, I say I work with them. I challenge governments quite a lot. And the amount of disjointed thinking by government is off the scale. That I keep saying the benefit to the NHS through having good housing could be amazing. The benefit to the education system for our kids, if they have a decent, secure, stable home, could be amazing. The benefits to other parts of the welfare state by providing good quality housing, it's been proven to be amazing in the past. I mean, it's already been mentioned about Dr. Addison, the health minister in 1919, because we didn't have a housing minister because we didn't build any houses back then. We need a cultural shift. And I believe, if I'm honest, that comes from people power. It's about us saying enough is enough. We're not going to put up with shit. We're not going to put up with a shit planning system that isn't delivering the homes that we need. We're not going to put up with some of the organizations out there that see housing as a commodity and as a share price and as a massive profit-making exercise, rather than actually genuinely building communities and building the homes that we need. I think we should be saying enough is enough when it comes to substandard, unsustainable homes. And I believe, I'm going to sound like a bit of a revolutionary, but I do believe in people power. You look at what's happened with Extinction Rebellion and Greta Thunberg, and in the last couple of years, it's been staggering. I mean, poor David Attenborough has been talking about this for the last 70 years, and he feels like he's only really being listened to now, and he's the god of sustainability and celebrating Mother Nature. We have to literally draw a line in the sand, I think, as a nation, and say enough is absolutely enough. We're not going to put up with this anymore. And I think unless we start doing that, we're not going to see all the shifts that we're hinting at tonight, and probably all the things that I imagine all the people who have joined this debate are very passionate about.
Thank you. It almost feels like a wonderful place to close, but I'm really, I know we're not working our way very well down the questions, but I'm really interested to see if Marie Monk-Hawksworth is here and would be willing to explain what she was talking about with local development orders. Has anyone used LDO's BC Make House? Marie, are you able to comment?
Don't think she's there.
No, no problem. Okay, let's carry on then. So I think there was some question about of members of Knoll West. How do you actually go about that process?
The failure of commercial development is the consultation, which is basically sending the youngest member of your team to a community event and then having them be shouted at for most of the evening, and then say, we've done our consultation, we've put some post-it notes up on the wall, and we're going to do what we were going to do anyway. So what we did was, working with the Knoll West Media Centre, which is an embedded arts-led organisation in Knoll West, was actually not do any propositions, but actually work with the community by listening. And there may be some colleagues online, I don't know, but for example, I think the statistics are the team had 576 cups of tea in people's front room. And this is where we were able to hear what the community was doing about housing.